Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 4. I wanted to take, since we are in midterm week, and this is the second lecture of the week, I usually like to give some food for thought. I like to also talk about not just what's in the book, but sort of bring it on home and have a conversation about using ASL in practical terms and maybe giving you a different perspective on what it means to use ASL. So there's going to be 2 parts to this lecture. One is what you're watching right now and my little introduction. And then I have a video that I want you to watch that's also in the LMS. It's part 2. It's about 15 minutes. So altogether will still be about the typical length without going too overboard this week, since I know you're also working on the midterm. But this video is, and you may have seen it before because it's gotten a million views and it's not new per se, but it's very unique in that I've never seen anyone kind of phrase out ASL the way she does. It is by Christine Sun Kim. You may have seen snippets of this TED Talk. This is the whole thing in its entirety, which I really love because I've only seen snippets of it. And then watching the whole thing really puts it into context. A few years back, she also interpreted, I think at the Super Bowl, the Super Bowl, she did the national anthem in ASL. So anyway, she's been around. She's an artist and she's done a bunch of stuff, and she was born deaf, and she talks about that a little bit in the TED Talk. And so I'm not going to repeat what she said per se, but as you watch her video, these are some of the things that I want you to be thinking about, and I would love to hear your thoughts in Go React. So feel free to type them in or do a little video snap or whatever you want to do, because there's going to be some things that I want to challenge your thinking about deaf culture, about ASL, about using the language. The whole thing that she prefaces ASL as compared to music and compared to sound, which when you think of deaf culture and you think about ASL, the last thing that you're going to think about is sound. However, she makes some really good analogies comparing the two, and I'm not going to go there because she does it far better than I ever could. So she talks about the cultural norms and sort of the what society focuses on and what society values. And I think that's a really important conversation. If you think about sort of what is and what she calls the social currency, basically saying that sound is analogous to money in our society, that's what's valued. Our voices, our music, those are things that are valued in society. And if you don't have sound, then it lacks social currency, to the point that a person who is deaf, who is using ASL, they are absolutely communicating, but because they're not using sound, by using their voice, they don't have social currency. And I think that if you look around in the deaf community, this is very true. Some of the things that I want you to comment on and be thinking about as you're watching the video are the things that, quite frankly, challenged my thinking as well. So, for example, she talks about her knowledge of music and her knowledge of sound and how she learned about sound, even though she's deaf, and she doesn't experience it firsthand, but she really does have a full, well-rounded, and fully developed understanding of sound, its impact, different types of sound, as well as the nuances of sound. So she talks about, how she knows that, like, a burp makes noise, or that when she's, looking for potato chips in the potato chip bag. And those are the kind of things that some people are observant to and learn, and some people don't. I wrote a bunch of notes as I was watching the video again, because it had been some time since I had seen it. So my first question to you is, what are some of the typical, what we call cultural norms? What are some of the cultural norms in society that make it difficult for a person who is deaf? So for example, one cultural, and a cultural norm can just be, what is the usual and general practice? So the usual and general practice, when I want to go, for example, order a coffee, excuse me, the usual and general practice is that I walk in and I tell the person behind the counter with my voice what I want. If I'm unable to do so and I walk in and just start signing instead, well, I'm challenging that social norm because that's not how it's usually done. That's not what's generally accepted. So just in terms of communication, then people who are deaf definitely challenge social and cultural norms all the time. But I'm sure if you think about even the impact of deaf culture and how we understand deaf culture, how that might even run even a little bit deeper, and think of some other examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm wondering if you can. Enter them in Go React if you have any that you can think of. One of the things she talks about is sound, along those lines, is sound etiquette, which is true. And she talks about the potato chip bag and things like that. We do. We have a sound etiquette. We know that when we're at a funeral or we're sitting in church or somebody is speaking, you know, we have certain etiquette rules that we know to follow. We also have, you know, those of us who are moms have probably been known to say at least once or twice to our children to use their inside voice. And most kids by a very young age know exactly what that means. They know that they yell a lot, but they also know that there's an inside voice, and that means to tone it down a little bit and speak at a more reasonable level, like the tone I'm using right now, and not amplifying their voice and do it, because that's, again, that's a cultural norm. That's what we're taught to do. We're taught to have a certain tone of voice in certain situations. We also know that in certain times that it is, you actually will whisper. Now, as a person who is hard of hearing, I will tell you that whispering is something that is very challenging to me. And I'm very direct when people do that with me. I can't do whispering anymore. It's very weird. I used to, but if someone starts to whisper, whispering just doesn't fall anywhere on my hearing radar under any circumstances. My captioning doesn't pick it up. My hearing aids don't pick it up. I have difficulty speech reading it because you change the way that you speak when you whisper. So I think people tend to be a little bit more dramatic in their speech when they whisper. So for example, if I'm talking to you right now, when I start to whisper, my lip shape actually changes. It's harder to lip read. So when people try to whisper to me, I'm like, sorry, I don't do whispering anymore. It's not even an option, so save it. So we have a whole sound etiquette, and Christine talks about this in the video. What she doesn't talk about, and I wrote this down because I'm kind of curious, if we have a sound etiquette and there's a general practice in the community about what's acceptable for people who are hearing, do we have a deaf etiquette? We do within the deaf community. There are certain things that amongst other deaf people that we generally do. So we have etiquette for, you know, in ASL and things like that. I'll give you a perfect example. There are some things that when I've been working with deaf consumers in the past, I've had to give them direct feedback on how they can mesh in with, and I just got very ASL, like right there and code switched on you. But so for example, when you're having a conversation as two hearing people, it is actually, you make eye contact, but to a point. One of those sound etiquette or communication etiquette things that we all do, and it's unspoken, we just know to do it. In fact, I think for a lot of us, it's subconscious, is we make eye contact, but we don't make constant eye contact. We look away periodically, and that's socially acceptable. In fact, it's a little disconcerting if someone is just staring at you while you're talking. It feels weird, it feels awkward, and we don't like that very much. At least I don't, and most people that I know would be like, why are you just staring at me like that? Like blink, like something, right? I mean, it would feel a little weird. But when I'm with a group of deaf friends, there's a different there's a different level of etiquette. And if you are communicating in ASL, because it's such a visual language, if you break eye contact too much and start doing that like you would with a hearing person, the deaf person you're speaking with is going to be offended. They're going to wonder what you're looking at. And in fact, I had to learn how to like change how I communicate, because I was going back and forth between like deaf friends and hearing friends. And when I was in grad school, I had a boyfriend who was deaf. And so, but I'd be with like in classes and with hearing people during the day sometimes, and then other times with deaf friends. And then I'd be talking with him and I would do what I normally do and kind of look, not like a lot, but, and then he would be, finally he was like, what the hell are you looking at? And he was really angry because it was very like, why aren't you paying attention to me? Like, you're supposed to be looking at me because I'm signing, which is true, because if you keep looking away, you're going to miss elements of the communication because it is all visual. So it's just an example of these little nuances in communication are really important. And they're not, some of these are just learned from just being with other people and stuff like that. But I think that Christine brings up some really great points about it being the social currency. And I guess my question to you is, what are some ways that we can make that have more validity or social currency in our society when people are not just doing what is the norm or what is expected? So if someone's using ASL, why isn't that as valid or as accepted as other forms of communication? Because that's something that we still need to work on. One of the things that really resonated with me in the video as well is her basically saying that, you know, if you don't speak then you don't really have a voice. And she meant that both literally and figuratively. You're not using your voice, but it also means you don't have a voice figuratively to the conversation. And I do think that that's very true for a lot of people who are deaf, because I mean, how many times if you've ever been out in the community, have you seen that someone will talk to the interpreter, but not to the individual, and things like that? It can be very difficult for a person who is deaf, who has something to say. They may be articulate, they may have so much to say, but it's just not acknowledged the same way as if they were speaking and presenting sound. So anyway, I'm gonna leave that there for now. I hope everyone's having a great week, and that if you have any questions, I'm always around. I can always set up a Zoom. So if anyone has questions, preparing for the midterm, I know some people have some stuff going on. By all means, let me know, and we'll work it all out. We'll figure it all out. I want everyone to just kind of be getting something out of the class and be moving your skills along. I know the interpreting assignments can be really challenging. That's the goal, is I want you to be learning and really be taking the time to self-analyze and look at your own skills, take inventory, and then continue to move it forward. That's really just the goal. If you have any questions on that, you can reach out to me anytime. And then, like I said, there'll be a second link. Watch Christine participate in the Go React. And then if there's anything that jumps out at you about how, I really love her analogy when she compares ASL to like that English is, one of the things she says is that English is very linear, a line, whereas ASL involves more parameters, and so that ASL is more like a music chord where you have to play all of the different parts together, and if you change one of those aspects, you actually change the whole meaning, which is true, because you have the sign, you have the hand shape, you have expression, you know, body motion, all of those things come together to create meaning in ASL. And you have to understand all of those aspects in order to be able to communicate effectively. And by changing any of the elements, you truly do change the language. And the more you understand those changes and more importantly, if you understand that you're in control of the changes to change the meaning accordingly, the better you get and the more fluent you get and more comfortable you get communicating in the language and just sort of immersing yourself in it. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Watch Christine's video and then tell me what you think in there. And that's going to be a really good setup for next week because we're going to get more into the grammar and stuff like that. And actually have some fun videos for you too, because part of learning how to do it is also learning how to not do it. So I have some really kind of, I wouldn't say fun because it's shameful, but I have some examples of ASL gone wrong. And we're going to start the conversation next week with that after you complete the midterm. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you need me. Have a great week, guys.